It seems like these types of stories are starting to become so prolific, you could almost do a video a day on this stuff. But today I wanted to talk about the state of Oregon. And I know that some of you are probably thinking, you know, this is Oregon, this is what happens in Oregon. But hear me out on this, because a lot of these things kind of start in some of these states, and then you start seeing them spread to other states. Okay, so the state of Oregon has effectively shut down small farms and market gardens on a large scale. And they're actually sending out cease and desist letters to farms, and they're using satellite technology to find their victims and then send them these letters and say, you can't operate. And they're doing it in the name of water conservation, groundwater protection. So there are two different laws that they're using to this effect. And I wanted to just mention those laws with a couple of these cases so that you get an idea of how they're being interpreted and utilized to shut down small farms. Okay, so I found a court case that was filed in January of this year. And it basically, in the National Review, there was an article that said, Oregon's government and dairy industry join forces against small farmers. And what they're doing in the state of Oregon is they've redefined what a CAFO is. And this doesn't just apply to small dairy farmers. This applies to people who have chicken houses, who have goat farms, basically anybody who has a barn or a facility that has a gravel or concrete floor. I will actually read to you what the definition is, and then we'll talk about how it's been impacting some people. According to Oregon, a CAFO, or a confined animal feeding operation, CAFO, the state of Oregon defines CAFOs as the concentrated feeding or holding of animals or poultry, including but not limited to a horse, cattle, sheep, or swine feeding areas, dairy confinement areas, and poultry and egg production facilities where the surface has been prepared with concrete, rock, or fibrous material to support animals in wet weather. That is what they define as a CAFO. And so what's happening in Oregon, and why the small dairies have filed a lawsuit against the state, and really I think from the list that you just heard me read, anybody who's producing eggs, it doesn't matter the size of the operation. You could have 2 milking cows. Okay, so here's an example for you. Sarah King, who owns Godspeed Hollow Farm in Newberg, Oregon, has a pickup station that's just 100 feet in length. She has an 11-acre property and keeps things pretty simple. She has 3 milking cows. She's been shut down for being called a CAFO. But because she has that milking stand, the state of Oregon said, you are a CAFO, and because you are considered a CAFO, we require you to put in this infrastructure improvement, which would cost her $100,000 you could never do with a couple cows. We're requiring this massive infrastructure upgrade for you to continue to operate your facilities to protect our groundwater from your 2 cows standing on a milking stand. And this is a problem that I see. The way that they have redefined CAFOs is going to impact nearly everybody. I mean, even on our farm, everybody's out to pasture. We don't have animals that are necessarily contained in one area. But in the bottom of our chicken house, do we have gravel and rock? Yes, we do. And in certain areas where, we pull animals in, we have gravel and rock. It just makes a lot of sense sometimes to have clean spaces. Sheep, for example, you don't want to shear a sheep just out in the field somewhere. I mean, you need a clean surface to do that, or you're going to end up with a bunch of stuff in your wool. So this law is being enforced in the state of Oregon. It has already shut down some farms. There's an injunction on the definition of the law until it can be heard in court, since the League of Justice, or whoever they are, have filed a court case in January to try and stop it. So currently, small dairy farmers, the way that I first read the article, you would think that they were going after, raw milk. That always seems to be the case with a lot of these things. But this is actually going after anybody, egg producers, anybody who has chickens that go up in a chicken house at night that may have a concrete floor that's easy for cleaning or whatever it is. And you have to go through a permitting process. And a lot of what they're requiring is just simply too much for the small farmer. So that's rule number one that's been impacting small farmers and is actually a part of an active court case right now. The second rule is one that I found fairly interesting. So in the state of Oregon, if you are using water, even groundwater, the only water that you can legally harvest and use without a permit is actually rainwater, okay? But they consider all water in the ground a resource of the public, the people. Even if you have a private well on your property, that belongs to the people of Oregon, not you. So what they've said is basically if you're using it for commercial purposes, you have to have a permit. Now there's an exemption to this rule. And this is a rule that went into place back in 2021, and then it has slowly rolled out to the point where market gardeners with a half acre of land are now receiving cease and desist orders saying, you can't water your gardens, figure out another way to do it. So under this rule, there's an exemption for commercial and industrial use for up to 5,000 gallons per day. Okay, so these gardeners with a half acre of land are probably using 1,000 gallons of water a day, not even 1,000 gallons of water a day. You would think that they're saying you're a commercial business because if you are growing food for yourself, they still allow you to utilize, water from your well to grow a half acre garden, up to a half acre garden. There's a limit on that. But this is the story I read was about a half acre market garden where the lady has been growing food and selling it to neighbors. It's been her primary income source. And they shut her down. Christina Del Campo has just over a half acre. She grows blueberries, local vegetables, things like that. Her farm is called Oak Song Farm near Eugene. She's operated there for 7 years, and she recently received a letter from the regional office of the Oregon Water Resources Department. It was a notification that the farm couldn't irrigate its commercial crops without a water right. According to Mike McCord, the Northwest Region Manager, water is a finite resource. The system of appropriation has been in place since 1909 in Oregon. It allows us to better manage the resource by having a permitting system. So this exemption for 5,000 gallons a day, which is for commercial, one-time or single operation, commercial and industrial use. So if you had multiple locations, you couldn't use the exemption multiple times, right? They shut her down because according to the Oregon Water Resources Department, the exemption for commercial use does not include irrigation of land. Now, looking into the actual Oregon exempt use for wells, it says nothing about does not include irrigation of land. All it says is that if you're a commercial user or industrial user, you get a single-use permit of up to 5,000 gallons per day for a $300 fee. And basically, the state of Oregon is coming in now, and they're putting things on people's wells to measure the amount of water. It's very invasive. Measure the amount of water they're consuming each day. And supposedly, Oregon's had these rules in place since 1909. They just keep changing them and keep implementing more things to them. Anyway, so they've sent out letters, not just to this one farmer, but multiple small farms, market garden farms, saying you can't water your crops anymore because under the exemption clause, irrigation isn't covered. This is actually a war on small farms. It's a war on small farms. I mean, why would you consider a small farmer with a couple milk cows and a milking stand in their barn a CAFO? That typically is not what you would think of as a CAFO. They're in confinement for a short period of time. They come up to eat and get milked, and then they go. Your chickens and egg laying, for example, where we have our chickens, we put their food inside the building so that it doesn't get rained on. I mean, we could be considered a CAFO under the state of Oregon's definition, and they could come to us and say, you got to shut your chickens down. You can't raise any more eggs unless you go through, this permitting process and put in, $100,000 worth of infrastructure to deal with the wastewater that's going to come off of that little 10 by 12 foot chicken house. This is one of the most egregious overreaches I have seen yet so far since I've been covering this stuff. And it's pretty obvious what's happening here. It's pretty obvious when they interpret a law other than what the law says, to say, no, it doesn't include irrigation, we're shutting down all the why is it so illegal to grow food in Oregon? And then, to go after small farmers who have very small operations, who aren't producing much poo or any type of runoff, really, and making them come up to code with the large scale operations. I don't even think that this is necessarily something that's coming from the big dairy lobbyists. Although, it wouldn't surprise me. Tom Vilsack is a big dairy lobbyist. In fact, he ran the largest lobbying group for dairy farmers. Whether you liked it or not, you had to pay into this Got Milk campaign and all this stuff, which paid his salary. Now he's our Secretary of Agriculture. It was kind of an enslaving thing for a lot of dairy farmers. A lot of dairy farmers didn't like the fact that they were, stuck in these programs, but they didn't have a choice, right? If they wanted to sell milk, there's so much regulation around it. And so they depended on people like Tom Vilsack. So it could be that the dairy, this group that Tom Vilsack was president of came in and said, what, we want you to change the definition of a small farm to be included with CAFOs because we don't like the unfair competition. It's very unfair now because there's no way that these small farmers can possibly do what they're being asked to do and run a successful business. I mean, they can't afford that type of infrastructure input. But seeing that this is coming at two different fronts at the same time, so the market gardeners started getting shut down in the fall, the small dairy farmers, and the way that this law reads, it'll include eggs and chicken and hogs, dairy goats, whatever it is that you have on your property, you can get shut down under what they're stating is the law and the policy in the state of Oregon. And they started going after them at the beginning of the year. That's when you saw these lawsuits start coming in and saying, hey, this is unconstitutional, because it is. They're stopping people from growing food. And, a market gardener or a small dairy farmer, they're not really competing or taking any percentage of the larger farmers. I don't think that the larger farmers really care. But these industry groups, these lobbyists, these associations, they might care. The bigger problem is that the government, the people who are elected to the state of Oregon, they're the ones that want to enforce these policies. They're the ones that are going out and purposefully, meticulously shutting down not just 5 or 6 farms, but we're talking in one mailing over 25 market gardeners, and they basically said, look, here's how we do this. We hear complaints. We have, a hotline for neighbors to call in and say, this person's growing a market garden, they're selling their vegetables to the public, and they're utilizing our water resources, tattletales is what I call them. Or they use satellite imagery and they say, okay, this person has a business license, they have this farm name for their farm, and they're growing crops on their land, and they're using their well water. They can tell all that from satellite images. We talk about that all the time on our farm because it's kind of creepy. Each year you get your satellite images updated of your property, and they start pinpointing where new buildings are. They'll actually send people out sometimes to assess you for more property taxes. At the same time that all of this is going on, the state of California is restricting water due to drought to 2,500 farmers. They're at 15% of their water supply right now. And we've seen this happening over and over and over again, where we're seeing them utilize water rights, water protection, for the public good, and using it to shut down farms across our country. Okay, if you look at the number of farms that we've lost since 2000, it's staggering. We've gone from 2,100,000 farms in 2000 down to 1,859,000 farms at the end of last year. And the scary thing about it is most of those losses, if you look at this on a chart, are within the last 4 or 5 years. And so the speed at which we're losing small farms have increased dramatically. And what have you seen? You've seen a lot of these cases where they've gone in and they've just shut off farms to water rights to an entire valley at a time because of drought. And in this case, they're shutting it off because of trout, not drought, trout, T. And you know what we're seeing in Oregon is we're seeing them take control over people's wells, putting meters on people's wells, shutting down small farms, shutting down small, what they call CAFOs, but you know, small dairy farms, small goat farms, small chicken farms, however you want to. It includes all of them, right? In the name of protecting the quality of our groundwater. Now, I'm somebody who's all for, you know, protecting groundwater. I think that we cause a lot of environmental degradation. I don't buy in at all to the global warming CO2 thing, but I do think that there are things that we need to do to protect our environment. And from my experience, most of the farms that I've visited, most of the farmers that I know, take protecting their environment and their land very seriously. I mean, when you look at these small market gardeners, and they're putting water out on their crops, most of them take soil science extremely seriously. And the better your soil science is, it's retaining a lot more of that moisture. So it's not really wasting as much water as one would think. It's not wasting as much water as, say, an industrial farmer who's tilling up, you know, hundreds of acres at a time and then putting sprayers out on them. I mean, these market gardeners don't have to utilize that much water every single day, the way that they manage their soil, the way that they grow their foods. It's actually probably much better. It is better. A small dairy farmer with cows that spend 99% of their time out in the field, or a small chicken farmer whose chickens only go into the coop at night, or maybe if they have some feed out, they go in there to get some feed, but then they're out frolicking and doing their thing. This could actually, because it leaves it open on the type of animal, it could actually apply to rabbit farmers, people who are raising rabbits. And I've seen rabbit setups where they're in areas with concrete floors that make them easy to scrape out. They put hay down for them. They make a very comfortable environment, but they have concrete floors to scrape them out. That would be considered a CAFO, even if they only have 2 or 3 rabbits in that space. You have to ask yourself, at what point in time is the government overreaching their objective in trying to protect the public and just use their rules and their regulations to control the public? At what point in time are they taking away people's resources that they should have the right to have? Everybody should have the right to fresh food. Everybody should have the right to farm fresh food. You know, Oregon is basically taking that right away from every Oregon citizen by taking away the rights of the small farmers to operate their businesses in the name of some laws that were originally put in place to protect groundwater from much larger scale operations. They've just simply reworded things and created their own definition about irrigation being a part of the commercial exemption or not. And in doing so, they're shutting down these small farmers who are the main resource for a lot of people to get, you know, farm fresh, direct to farm produce and meats in the state of Oregon. I would think that this should open up the people's eyes a little bit and maybe help them realize that what these people are doing is not protecting them. It's taking away their rights. It's taking away their access to good, healthy foods, and get some of these people out of there. My fear is that other states are going to look at these court cases, they're going to look at what the state of Oregon has done, and they're going to start implementing it on their own. And that's something that we've seen time and time again. There's usually a state or city that does something. They do something that is obviously overreaching for any government in a free country. And then, you know, it's like a test to see how it's challenged, where it's challenged, and what policies worked so that they can proceed. And then once you get through that test phase, once you get through all the kinks, you start seeing it spread to other states, to other similar governments. Anyway, guys, I just wanted to draw your attention to that. I found it fairly interesting. You could look up some of these stories yourself, and if you read the laws, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's very interesting to see how this is going to roll out, and if any of it sticks, to see what other states will start implementing similar clauses into their water protection laws, etc. Stay tuned until next time.